Throughout the course of gaming history, we have seen a lot of companies dip their feet in the horror gaming genre, a genre that's been around since the 1970s and has continued to gain popularity throughout the years due to its exhilarating feeling that can be obtained from it. However, throughout the years, there has only been a few video games that have managed to get it right. So, in today's video, we're going to be taking a trip down memory lane to take a look at some of these masterpieces. Sit back and relax as we take a deep dive into the nostalgic world of old horror games. Back in 2010, Swedish studio Frictional Games would take the internet by storm with its first-person horror game Amnesia. Its sole focus on psychological horror, with of course the occasional jump scare, meant that it was able to rip you out of the real world for a few hours and place you in a dingy looking castle where you played as Daniel, a protagonist with no recollection as to how and why he has ended up where he is. Wandering around the castle, you start to unearth the secrets hidden within it. However, a certain innovative addition to the game would really allow it to stand out: sanity. This part of the game alone would be the main reason why the player could really connect with Daniel. The fear of the dark would become such an important factor in this game's eeriness, as spending more time in it would decrease Daniel's sanity, eventually leading to visual and audio hallucinations that would catch the player off guard. This meant that the player had to manage their light sources efficiently, adding to the intricacy of the game. Even though there was a physical presence in the castle waiting to chase you down a corridor, this wasn't the main worry of the player. The main enemy of the game was the darkness itself, and the player would spend most of their time in it. The foreboding tension that all of these factors would add up to would create such an edge-of-the-seat experience that would leave the player terrified, yet addicted. Now let's talk about the physical threats for a second. Like said, they weren't actually the main worry for the player. However, when they did run into one of these entities, the game's tempo would go from 0 to 100 in an instant. From slowly walking around a castle, strategically searching every room for supplies, avoiding the draining of your sanity, to sprinting down a hallway at full speed, searching for any corner of the castle to hide in. The music would suddenly switch to an overwhelming blast of uncanny synths, disorientating the player as if the shaking screen and blurriness had not already disorientated them enough. Then, all of a sudden, it was back to creeping around again. This mix of tempo meant that the player would never know what to expect. Things could change in an instant, leaving the player once again on the edge of their seat. Now, I'm no game designer, however, I can say that I believe that the immersion is the hardest thing to perfect in horror games, and I believe Amnesia was a perfect example of when it's done right. This game had no HUD, nothing, not even a health bar, just the player and the environment. This was peak immersion. If the player needed any information about their status, they either had to guess or, in the rare case, check their inventory. I say in the rare case because the small amount of things that could be tracked with a bar of some sort were chosen very intelligently. We talked about the main danger of the game being the dark, so strategically, the player could check the exact level of the oil left in their lamp, their only source of light, meaning that as the game went on, the player would constantly check their oil levels, developing a heightened sense of anxiety that would build and build, adding to the already overwhelming amount of horrifying factors this game already consisted of. The last thing I'll talk about in regards to how incredible the game was the ability for custom storylines that not only made the game replayable but also opened up the chance for players to use their creativity. Being able to create such amazing stories within this game would mean that a whole other community of artists was born. It was no longer just players, but authors too that would fall in love with this game. This was so important for its longevity. Throughout the video, I've talked about this game as if it were in the past, but some could argue that the relevancy of the game still stands to this day, proving why Amnesia was the perfect example of a horror game done right. Now, I've talked about Slender on this channel before, however I think it's only right to touch base on it again. The way that Slender, the 8 pages, paved the way for indie horror games should never be forgotten. The Slender Man himself has become such an icon in pop culture nowadays that if I flashed a picture of him on screen, I'm sure any of you would be able to tell me who he is. Created by Mark J. Hadley back in 2012, Slender took the internet by storm. The simplicity of the game meant that anyone looking for a scare could play. However, with this simplicity came an intense atmospheric design. You play as an unnamed protagonist stuck in a dark forest with no recollection as to why or where you are. The only goal is to find 8 pieces of paper scattered across the forest. Simple, right? Well, not so much. You see, throughout the forest you are being watched, stalked by a supernatural entity with the only intention of making your life a living nightmare. The sound design itself is what makes this game what it is. Everything down to the leaves crunching beneath your feet is enough to get your hairs rising on the back of your neck. The wind breezing through the trees, the increasingly rapid breathing of the player, and of course the After collecting the first page, a deep and heavy booming starts to creep up on you. It's then that you realize that this game is not going to be as simple as you thought. But that's not all. That overwhelming sense of being watched starts to become a reality when something in the distance catches your eye. It's just standing there, observing you from afar. Not too far away that it's out of sight, but close enough to let you know that it's there. As soon as you start to collect more pages, you start to hear and see the sound of static, a warning sign from whatever the entity is. This time you can see it. A tall, slim man with abnormally long arms, dressed in a black suit. The most disturbing and uncanny thing about this man is his face. Maybe you're too far away to see them, however, the features on his face seem to be missing. A blank expression that, although the face has no eyes, resembles a piercing stare. The booming intensifies and the static follows you. Whoever this is, they're getting closer, toying with your mind and sanity. Your breathing is getting faster, your footsteps getting louder. And just like that, he's got you. A simple but effective game which, because of this, was adopted by the content creators of YouTube. This in turn accelerated the game to stardom. Slender became such an icon in the horror game world that countless spin-offs were made. However, as good as these spin-offs may be, they will never be able to outdo Slender, the 8 pages. Back in 2014, Kojima Productions would release a demo for an upcoming Silent Hill game, simply called PT, or Playable Teaser. It had a brief availability, but that didn't stop it from becoming one of the most influential horror games of its time. Taking place inside an eerie mansion, the player would have to explore the seemingly endless hallways, solving puzzles and finding cryptic messages in order to progress. As we have seen before, this would also be paired with the overwhelming sense of being watched, or in this case, followed. It's scary enough being watched and followed in a large forest like we saw in Slender, but that frightening feeling becomes all more real when it takes place inside of the mansion. The players feel more trapped. If they were suddenly in need of an escape from whatever is lurking in the mansion, they can only escape so far, adding to the claustrophobia of the game. The hallways in which you are slowly adventuring down seem to repeat over and over again, just with small, subtle changes. It's as if you are stuck in a never-ending paradox. It slowly drives you insane, leading up to the final encounter, which of course is terrifying. One of the things that made this game so creepy was the discovery that once the player picks up the flashlight, Lisa, the paranormal antagonist, is also right behind you. Players figured out that if they adjusted the camera and hacked it in a specific way, it revealed that Lisa is actually tethered to the back of the player. She is literally following you every step of the way. This raised a different level of fear, knowing that on your first playthrough, she was right there behind you the whole time. Even worse, knowing that she will always be right behind you on the second playthrough is enough to get you to turn on the bedroom lights whilst you play. Unfortunately, the Silent Hill game that was being teased was eventually cancelled. Internal conflicts and tensions resulted in Kojima's departure of the company, and as Kojima was the driving creative force behind the project, it broke down, leaving us with PT, a standalone teaser of a game that nearly was. This is not a bad thing though, as the legacy that PT left will never be forgotten, and what it did for the horror game industry as a literal teaser is incredible. Hats off to you, Kojima.
Changing weather patterns were to blame for livestock behavior. We encourage ranchers and breeders to attend this weekend seminar on Beulah Avenue in Pueblo. And if you're out late tonight, you may see some...
If you take the feeling of helplessness with the claustrophobia, sound design, and the danger of a physical presence, add gore and grotesque imagery, and then use the aspects of found footage to piece it all together, you get Outlast. An absolute masterpiece of a game developed by a company called Red Barrels. This game took the internet by storm in 2013, throwing avid video gamers into an asylum with nothing but a video camera. We would enter the asylum with matching curiosity as the protagonist, but that curiosity would quickly disappear and turn into the need to escape once we realized we are in over our head. We are quickly introduced to the twins and Chris Walker, and even quicker we realize that we need to stay as far away from them as possible in order to even have a slight chance of making it out of this asylum alive. As we adventure deeper into the asylum, we come across more and more grotesque imagery that suggests that whatever is going on inside this place is not ideal, to say the least. Distant, agonizing screams constantly remind you that you are definitely not the only one suffering as well. This whole place is a big nope, but getting out is a lot harder than getting in. Adding to all of this, the AI of the antagonists mean that they would follow you around, randomly checking hiding spots and reacting to small sounds that you make. This would make the situation you are in feel all the more immersive. You would have to think before any action, and God forbid you alert a nearby antagonist. You have to make split-second decisions about hiding spots, and best believe that if you got the decision wrong, the consequences would follow. And without the ability to fight back, you are helpless. The game was so good that it would be followed by a couple of other Outlast installments. Red Barrel proved that they had what it took to create a truly horrifying game, resulting in the other AAA game developers taking notes and solidifying their spot in the gaming industry. Throughout the video, we have touched on some of the horror games that I believed paved the way for games we have today. They were some of the rare instances where the developer just got it right. However, this opens up the opportunity to let me know of any other games that managed to do this in your opinion. Let me know if you would like to see a part 2, and if so, what games should I touch on next? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.